You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. Colorectal cancer is now the leading cause of cancer deaths for Americans under the age of 50. That's according to a paper published last month in JAMA. This research backs up a trend that doctors have been seeing for a while now. Colon cancer isn't just a disease that affects older people. Just last week, James Vanderbeek, who played Dawson on Dawson's Creek, died of colorectal cancer at just 48 years old. In the past few years, more health organizations have followed the American Cancer Society in lowering the recommended age for colon cancer screenings from 50 to 45 years old. And more recently, there's been a trend online that encourages people to start fibermaxxing, which is really just a fancy way of telling them to eat more fiber. Dr. Rachel Issaka is the director of the Colorectal Cancer Screening Program for the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center and UW-Medicine. Dr. Issaka, hi. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Libby.
So we are going to talk about colorectal cancer today. And so for people to understand, what does that mean? Is it an umbrella term with different types of cancers? Can you just kind of explain a little bit about that?
When we talk about colorectal cancer, we're really talking about cancers that happen in the colon or the rectum, which is the very last part of your digestive tract. As a gastroenterologist, I describe part of my job is, helping people understand what happens once they eat food. Think of the colon as the very last stop on the processing journey of your food as it's making its way out of your body. And those cancers that happen there, that's what we call the colorectal cancers.
So this was a study by American Cancer Society researchers who found that colorectal cancer is the leading cause for cancer death for younger people. And that's obviously concerning. I'm curious, from your perspective, what has this trend looked like in your practice and in the practices that you oversee?
So we know that since the mid-1990s until now, the rates of colon cancer in people under 50 have been slowly creeping up. And initially, based on estimates, we guessed that it would become the number one cause of cancer deaths in men and women under 50 by 2040. And so this new research was very alarming because we're only in 2026, and this is happening earlier than anticipated. In my own practice, what we are seeing are people who are coming in young, having symptoms like rectal bleeding or abdominal pain, and historically thinking that colon cancer was a disease of older people and that this could not be what's causing their symptoms, only to be really alarmed to learn that that was in fact what was causing their symptoms. And so I think we have a lot of work to do in educating everyone, general public to physicians and everybody in between, that colon cancer is no longer just a disease of older people, but can affect anyone.
What do you think is going on here when we say it's the most likely cause of death, of cancer death among young people? Are we getting better at screening for other types of cancers and missing the colon cancer more often now? Or has the severity and frequency of colon cancer in young people increased? What's happening here?
I really do think that there are more cases of colon cancer in younger people than previously. And so when we look at the numbers of colon cancers in people who were born after the 1960s, we just see more cancers there than in people who were born before the 1960s. And so we think that there's fundamentally something that is going on after that time period that's leading to the increased number in cases. And now what we're seeing is also now the increased number of deaths. Certainly we are getting better with screening, but as you mentioned, only recently was the age to start screening dropped from 50 to 45. And so for many years, people under 50 were not getting routine screenings. And in fact, were being detected as having colon cancer after they were presenting with symptoms and then getting the diagnostic tests.
And that has to be not ideal for treatment, right? I mean, when it comes to early detection, what can that mean for somebody's outcomes?
For colon cancer, we think about it as one of the most preventable cancers, and that's because when it's found early, it responds very well to treatment. So, to give you some numbers, somebody who is diagnosed with an early stage colon cancer, meaning it has not left the colon, in 5 years, 90 to 95% of those people are living and doing well.
Wow.
Now, let's say we don't find that cancer until after it's spread out of the colon. That number, that 90 to 95, drops to about 11% of people doing well in 5 years.
Mm.
So the difference is quite dramatic. And one of the key issues and reasons why, now that the age to begin screening has been lowered, that we all need to be advocates for getting people in once they're 45. And I'll also add that for those that aren't 45, that we encourage people to explore symptoms that they're experiencing that could be related to colon cancer, and to also know their family history, because that could mean that somebody needs to start this process earlier.
What causes colon cancer? Do we know?
So, what we know is that cells all throughout our body are constantly shedding and regrowing. In the same ways that our skin sheds and regrows when we cut ourselves, that process happens inside our colon as well. And for a number of reasons, when more cells grow than are shedding and dying, that process is what leads to cancer. For colon cancer in particular, there are other things that influence that as well. And that can include diet. And so, for example, we know red processed meats can sometimes speed up that process of increased cell growth and not enough cells dying. We know alcohol can do the same thing, as well as tobacco. And so things that we consume can affect that process. We know that certain diseases, so for example, people who have ulcerative colitis or Crohn's, that happens more frequently. And then also people with certain genetic mutations like Lynch syndrome, that process is happening more frequently. And so what screening tries to do is to interrupt that process, where we're trying to catch those growths before they've evolved into cancer, or we're trying to, catch that cancer at an early stage.
And in your opinion, what could be driving the increase for young people at this point? Is it the environmental or diet factors that you're talking about? Is there something else going on?
There have been a few new recent studies that are lending insight into why colon cancer could be happening in young people. One that came out about a month ago focused on alcohol. And these authors looked at a large data set of people over a long period of time. And what they found was that in people who were under the age of 50, that drinking more than two or more alcoholic beverages per day led to an increased risk of developing colon cancer. And so for years, we've said, that sort of the safe amount for women to drink is 1 drink or less per day, for men, 2 drinks or less. And so if you do that math, it's either 7 or 14. But what this study is showing is that 2 or more drinks per day, more than 14 drinks per week, does increase the risk of colon cancer in young people. There's another study that came out that showed that eating ultra processed foods, so a lot of the prepackaged foods that are very convenient, and other things that exist and are easy to consume, that those foods over time also lead to increase in polyps, and that those particular polyps are the ones that can grow and further become colon cancer. And I'll mention one final thing we're also learning about, which is obesity. And so I mentioned that starting in 1960, we see this increase in colon cancer in people who are young. And we see a very similar overlay of obesity on top of that as well. And this is true in the United States and in many westernized countries. So think of Australia, the UK, and others. We're seeing a very similar trend. And so going back to the work on the ultra processed foods, that suggests that, it's not just the foods, but also the ways in which our body is changing is leading to an increased risk of colon cancer in people who are under 50.
And what should people who are hearing this right now look for if they're concerned? Are there symptoms? Are there risk factors that they should be aware of?
Yeah. So I will say that for anybody who's 45 and above and has not yet been screened for colon cancer, to talk to your healthcare team to come up with a plan for screening.
Get your colonoscopy. Is that what the message is, doctor? Am I
Yeah.
interpreting you correctly?
Colonoscopy is one.
Get your colonoscopy.
Yes, and there are also other ways to screen. So if the colonoscopy is not the right choice for you, there are stool-based tests that are available as well, but talk to a member of your healthcare team and come up with a plan. Now, for the people who are 45 and above and are having symptoms, absolutely. Colonoscopy, do not pass go. There's nothing else there for you. And I'll also say that for people that are under 45 that are having symptoms, and that can look like bright red blood in their stool, abdominal pain that's not otherwise explained, weight loss that's happening when you're not doing as much as you would, anticipate would be required for such weight loss. Or changes in your stool. Let's say you notice all of a sudden your stools that are nice and round are now flat and pencil-like. If you're having any of those symptoms at any age, you likely need a colonoscopy. And so talk to a member of your healthcare team to not delay that care.
And what are some of the ways that people can reduce their chances of developing colon cancer, doctor? I mean, it sounds like avoid the ultra-processed foods and the red, was it processed meats that you want to avoid?
Yeah. So, we tell our patients everything in moderation. It's really hard to tell somebody to eliminate something completely from their diet. I think if there are people who consume tobacco, because of such a strong correlation of tobacco to many cancers, that's something we want you to try to quit. And I acknowledge that's really hard, but there are a lot of great tools and resources to help people do that. We just talked about alcohol. Try to limit consumption to less than 2 drinks a day, less than 14 drinks a week. So really, we think less when it comes to alcohol is more, right? That's going to confer greater benefit. The red processed meats are really interesting. So we're talking here about sort of the jerkies and the charred barbecued meats. Everybody enjoys a good barbecue in the summertime, right? So we're not saying don't ever have barbecue, but just that can't become a staple of your diet, because in the process of getting those meats into those states, it releases chemicals that can actually convert cells into cancer cells. And so when we say limit that intake, we're trying to avoid your exposure to those cells that can change, and lead to cancer developing in your body.
I am the girl at the barbecue who will take the completely charred hot dog, doctor. And I am second guessing myself now. I'm going to have my moment to think about my choices. And this is the gift that you're giving me and our audience.
I want you to hit pause once you are offered that and say, what else is here that, I might potentially be able to consume instead?
Okay, noted. Okay, I want to talk to you about this fibermaxxing thing. It's all over social media. If you are scrolling on Instagram or TikTok, people are adding chia seeds to things. They're adding kale and the most cruciferous stuff that they possibly can. I just heard from my managing producer, Sarah, that she eats something called fiber balls in the morning that involves like a bunch of oats and things. Sounds delicious. What is the deal with fibermaxxing? What do you think of the trend?
Okay, so I recently learned about fibermaxxing. And for your audience, what it is essentially trying to get people to consume large amounts of fiber beyond what is recommended. So if you're a woman, we recommend about 28 to 30 grams of fiber per day. For men, we recommend about 35 grams of fiber per day. And the reason why the recommendations are different is because, in large part, due to physique. Women typically have less muscle mass than men. That's not always the case, but typically. And so as a result, just require less in order to maintain the caloric needs that they have. Most Americans, most people do not get the daily amount of fiber that they need. And so I am not a fan of fibermaxxing. As your local gastroenterologist, please do not fibermax. But what I want you to do is to get the daily fiber that you need. And what that can look like is, for example, maybe it's a bowl of oatmeal in the morning instead of something else, right? Or maybe it's, making sure you have a lot of nice leafy green vegetables, or maybe some more beans as part of your dinner. I think that really is important because we know the right amount of fiber is good for your gut. What do I mean by that? The right amount of fiber will ensure that your bowel movements are regular, that they look, how we want it to look. And in GI, we typically think of a nice sausage, appearance to stool, right? That's what we're aiming for. We want people to have, on average, one bowel movement per day. Everybody's different. And that's what fiber gives you. It gives you consistent, healthy looking bowel movements, so that if things change, we can say, well, what happened here? Let's explore that. And let's figure out what's going on.
So if you overdo it, is there a downside? You said you're not a fan of the maxing. It sounds like you're more of a fiber midding or fiber minning or something. The amount that's recommended, not going over it. So is there a downside to overdoing it?
Potentially, potentially eating more fiber than you should could have the opposite effect and, potentially cause abdominal discomfort, might lead to, really hard stools, or having a bowel movement and still not feeling like you've completely finished everything and then needing to go back to the restroom. So people become uncomfortable if that happens. And so, yeah, we want to try to avoid overshooting for that reason.
Before we go, I mean, we talked a little bit about the ways that people can, be on top of this issue of colorectal cancer, because it is a growing problem, especially for young people. When you're over 45, that idea of getting screened is kind of like built into the medical system. It's recommended by many medical associations. People can lean on insurance to cover the costs. If somebody's under 45 and they're worried about colon cancer, but they don't fall into one of those recommended groups for screening, what do you recommend for them?
So first, I recommend to know your family history, because family history is so important when it comes to colon cancer. Let's say somebody's father was diagnosed with colon cancer at 40. The recommendation for that person would be to start screening at 30 years old, right? But not knowing that history, you're not able to take that to your healthcare team to get the care that you need. So one, I really encourage everyone to talk to relatives, find out why Aunt Susie, find out why, your grandmother, grandfather passed away, because that's really powerful information. The second thing I would say is to not dismiss or ignore symptoms. For a really long time, we saw and heard stories from patients who would say, well, I was having intermittent bright red blood per rectum, and I was told it was hemorrhoids and not to worry too much about it. And then I came back and we unfortunately found that I had cancer. What I said earlier, we know that colon cancer is no longer just a disease of older people. And one of the signs of colon cancer can be bright red blood per rectum. So if you're under 45, experiencing intermittent blood in your stool, it's not going away, just go and talk to a member of your healthcare team and ask, hey, do you think it's worth exploring this further with a gastroenterologist? And I would say the same of other symptoms like abdominal pain that's not going away, weight loss that's unexplained. Abdominal pain is an interesting one because it's very common. Everybody has a little bit of abdominal pain. You might get abdominal pain if you have to give a talk or if you have to run a race. And so a lot of times people don't think too much about it, but it's one of those symptoms that if it's consistent over a long time, you can't quite pinpoint what is causing it. If nothing else, again, worth having a discussion with your healthcare team. Let's make sure there aren't other diseases that are there that could be contributing to your symptoms. And certainly, let's take off the most concerning diagnosis, which would be colon cancer. So that would really be my advice for young people who don't quite fit into that screening category, is to, one, know their family history and to not dismiss symptoms.
Yeah, don't accept that pain as just part of life.
Yeah.
Get to the bottom of it if you can.
Yes.
Dr. Rachel Issaka is the director of the colorectal cancer screening program for the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center and UW Medicine. Thank you so much, doctor, for being here and for helping guide better barbecue choices for me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Libby, for helping raise awareness of this disease.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org, or of course on your favorite podcast app.